Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. Welcome to Saturday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. Yes, James Gunn has extensively discussed how much freedom he got with Warner Brothers with the Suicide Squad, even comparing it to the freedom he gets with the MCU, considering, just listen to this, he has said that Kevin Feige spends more time on the editing process with him on the MCU films than Warner Brothers did on the Suicide Squad. We will read that interview and article and we will discuss that along with other situations within the DCEU. But first of all, very good news if you're a supporter of the future of the DCEU, because Dwayne Johnson calls Black Adam the hardest undertaking of my entire career as DC film wraps. The Warner Brothers New Line film is due in theatres July the 29th, 2022 by Ryan Parker of The Hollywood Reporter. Dwayne Johnson is telling fans straight up that Black Adam was the hardest film he has made, and given his enormous resume, that is saying a lot. The film superstar took to social media Friday to announce that his upcoming DC film had indeed wrapped, but also to open up a bit about the brutal production. Incredible journey, Johnson said in part, hardest undertaking of my entire career, physically and mentally worth every second. Boundless gratitude to my 1,000+ crew members, actors and directors James Gunn and the hierarchy of power in DC Universe is changing, and I'm very excited to see how this is all going to change The Rock. The Black Adam anti-hero star was responding to another tweet from a fan account that featured a video of Johnson thanking the crew for all their efforts and saying how excited he was for fans to see the picture. We are all very excited, Dwayne, to see this movie, and we are in full support of you. Well, the same people who actually love DC and want DC live action to have a great future. Black Adam, which also stars Noah Centineo, Aldis Hodge, Sarah Shahi, Quintessa Swindell and Pierce Brosnan, is now the second New Line DC film following 2019's hit Shazam. That hero is arch rivals with Black Adam. Like most projects, production on Black Adam was delayed amid the pandemic. Danny Garcia and Hiram Garcia of 7 Bucks Productions are producing with Beau Flynn of Flynn Pictures Co. Flynn Pictures Co.'s Scott Sheldon is serving as an executive producer. Black Adam is due in theatres July the 29th, 2022. And this is what he's quote tweeting. And that's a wrap. Many cast and crew, including at The Rock himself, have wrapped production of Black Adam. The film will open in theatres July the 29th, 2022. By the way, there's still some people doing some stuff on Black Adam, but Dwayne has definitely wrapped production with his part. So basically he says, that's a wrap on Black Adam. Incredible journey, hardest undertaking of my entire career, physically and mentally worth every second. Boundless gratitude to my 1,000+ crew members, actors and director. James Gunn, the hierarchy, why can't I say that bloody word? The hierarchy of power in DC Universe is changing. BA, aka Black Adam. So it's very exciting that the film's wrapped. Obviously we're going to see trailers for all these upcoming movies at DC Fandom Volume 2, should we call it. And I'm very excited. And just to remind you, this is the place where DC Fandom will be covered in its entirety. By hook or by crook, I will get a laptop, excuse me, and we will be streaming live the entirety of DC Fandom. Now, I won't be able to show you DC Fandom live, but I'll be watching it and I'll be commentating and reacting to all the big news and all the big reveals exclusively here on Movies TV Mad. How James Gunn decided which Suicide Squad characters to kill. Writer-director James Gunn opens up about how he chose which characters to kill off in the DC Extended Universe follow-up to the Suicide Squad by Grant Hermans of Screen Rant. Writer-director James Gunn opens up about how he chooses which characters to kill off In the DC Extended Universe follow-up, The Suicide Squad, the upcoming action film centres on the titular group of villains tasked by Amanda Waller to destroy Nazi-era laboratory and prison Jotunheim on the fictional South American island of Corto Maltese. However, they find their mission complicated and made deadlier with the discovery of the telepathic kaiju-sized starfish known as Starro. The Suicide Squad acts as a standalone follow-up to David Ayer's critically tarnished but financially successful 2016 effort. Well, it's not actually David Ayer's effort. Obviously, he shot the scenes and he wrote elements of the movie. Had to be rewritten by him as well. It is kind of his movie. With Margot Robbie, Jay Courtney, Joel Kinnaman and Viola Davis all reprising their roles. The new film also sees the DCEU debuts of John Cena, David Dastmalchian, Idris Elba, Sylvester Stallone, Peter Capaldi, Daniela Melchior, Michael Rooker, Nathan Fillion, Sean Gunn, Florilla Borg and Taika Waititi. With less than a month to go until the film's arrival, the anticipation is growing higher for the DCEU follow-up. Warner Brothers recently screened a highly anticipated film for a group of journalists, with Gunn attending a Q&A. Afterwards, during the conversation, Gunn opened up via Heroic Hollywood about his process in deciding which characters would be killed off in the film, noting some came originally from the story while others he knew ahead of time and some even surprised him. See what Gunn had to say below. It's fun watching people die, if you say so, James. I mean, I had to choose what characters I was going to use from DC, and I had a huge trove of characters to choose from, obviously. I chose some characters that I knew were going to die. We see that as the movie plays out, and it was just about choosing different characters for different reasons. I wanted it to be a really wild spectrum of types of characters from DC, to be able to have somebody who's cool and sort of, you know, angry like a dark character, like Bloodsport. But then also somebody who is completely over the top, seemingly goofy, but someone we give soul to, like Polka Dot Man. And then somebody who's incredibly useless, like Javelin, who's going to a machine gun fight with a javelin of all things, and then an alien Mongol, and having all these different characters and seeing what happens. The writer-director also discussed his emotional connection to the wide roster of characters seen in the film and how killing them off wasn't always easy for him. Having gone back and forth on which characters could survive explosive events of the film, Gunn expressed surprise at who lived, while finding some still break his heart. Namely, 2 characters bring tears to his eyes upon revisits, Gunn said. There are 2 characters who die later in the film that turned in amazing performances at their best, that are like, oh my god, and they're such good guys too. It was sort of organic. I'm just following the story, and the story dictates everything for me. And whatever the story needed in that moment, I didn't but balk. And you know, in a way, it's weird because I love these characters. In another way, it's weird because I am Amanda Waller. I'm pushing that button on those characters because it serves our purpose as an audience to see them go. Since signing on for the film, Gunn has teased his carte blanche reign from WB to kill off whoever he wanted in the film. As tempting as it could have been for him to wipe the slate clean from Ayer's film, it's been a nice assurance for trailers to point towards many original characters, still maintaining a strong presence in the story. With the emotional departures Gunn delivered with his Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, there's no telling how heartbreaking some deaths will be with his new film. For obvious spoiler reasons, Gunn and the attending journalist did well to keep mum about just how many characters will be dead by the end of the Suicide Squad, but Gunn's expressions of getting teary-eyed over 2 specific deaths is intriguing. The filmmaker has expressed praise for his entire ensemble cast, but between his love for Melchior's Ratcatcher 2 and Dastmalchian's Polka Dot Man and his reunion with frequent collaborators Gunn, Rooker and Fillion, there's no telling what audiences can expect. Luckily, the wait is almost over as the film arrives on August the 5th. So, we've been through this before. He's allowed to kill anyone off. Yes, Harley too. And anyone else. You know, Captain Boomerang, anyone. And he can kill basically anyone in this film, and he probably does. So, when you go and see this film, you shouldn't be triggered by who he kills, because basically, he kills almost everyone in this film. I can tell you that exclusively right now. But as I keep on saying, and as you well know without me telling you this, The Flashpoint movie is coming. That film will reboot the entire DC Extended Universe. It will reboot the multiverse, a bit like what Oliver Queen did on the Arrowverse, which in fact what happens in Flashpoint will make the Arrowverse and all the Earths that we've ever seen, including Superman the movie that now belongs pretty much to Brandon Routh's Superman, all these will be canon within the DC Extended Universe. So when Barry reboots the multiverse and reboots the DCEU, all these characters that are face down in the dirt who were killed off by James Gunn can come back. It's like taking a plug out and starting again when your computer freezes. That's all it is. So even though it's great we're going to see these deaths and it's great that these risks are being taken, just remember your favourite characters, even if they're killed off, will return. I think this is a great take from someone talking about the Suicide Squad. Sounds like they've seen it. He's called JD. He's not verified. I don't know who he is. Clarkson David P, whoever that is. Anyway, this is what Clarkson had to say. The Suicide Squad feels like a comic book splashed on the big screen. Something that I agree with the 90-minute test screening that I saw. You always want to hear this, that it feels like a comic book, because it is a comic book movie. A lot of the MCU doesn't visually feel like a comic book, and that's disappointing a lot of the times. With glorious visuals and killer action, the film is packed with memorable performances, especially from Margot Robbie, Idris Elba, David Dastmalchian and Daniela Melchior. Oh, and Sylvester Stallone's King Shark is instantly iconic. Yeah, absolutely. The thing is here, the whole cast are fantastic. Now, you may feel that someone's outshone the other, but basically, James Gunn individually spends time with all his actors and really works with his character work. I think this is the difference between someone like James Gunn and Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder's a visual medium, not in VFX especially, just he feels that the pictures and the artwork he draws are more important than the scripts. Now that's interesting. Where James Gunn's all about the script and the visuals. It's an amalgamation of everything, but his character work to him is the most important. And this is why broader audiences respond to James' movies. James Gunn talks DC versus Marvel, Kevin Feige way more involved with editing than Warner Brothers. This is the one I was teasing at the beginning of the video. I'm going to read this and then I'm going to have a lot to say. Because I've always had a lot to say, haven't I? That's the way you like it, right? Anyway, James Gunn is the first and only filmmaker so far to have directing credits on films in both the Marvel Cinematic Universe, his Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, and the DC Extended Universe Warner Brothers upcoming tentpole The Suicide Squad. During an interview with the New York Times, Gunn was asked if he saw major differences between how Marvel and DC approach their film franchises. Gunn responded by saying, DC Films does not have an all-involved presence like Marvel has with studio president Kevin Feige. This moment, what he says here, is very telling, and it's going to trigger those propaganda agenda people from the Snyderverse community. But it's the truth. So let's say that again. Upcoming tentpole The Suicide. During an interview with the New York Times, Gunn was asked if he saw major differences between how Marvel and DC approach their film franchises. Gunn responded by saying DC Films does not have an all-involved presence like Marvel has with studio president Kevin Feige. Although Gunn was quick to point out there are not as many differences as people probably think. That's interesting, but the process of making a movie is a process of making a movie wherever you are. There's no doubt Kevin Feige is way more involved with editing than people are at Warner Brothers, Gunn said. He gives more notes, you don't have to take them, and I don't always take them. Then again, I had more problems if you saw the first cut of Guardians 1. It had more problems because that was my first time making something so gigantic, and there's some learning to what works and what doesn't, carving away the excess stuff. The truth is, as Marvel goes on and Kevin Feige starts to amass ownership of half of all the film in general, he's more spread out. So this is very interesting, even for MCU fans, by the way. As for his future, Gunn has been honest about the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 being his last Marvel movie for the foreseeable future. Gunn hasn't made any decisions, but he seems to be interested in sticking with DC films as they are prioritising filmmakers' visions over the interconnected storytelling that is Marvel's bread and butter. Very, very interesting. And that is one of the ways in which DC can distinguish itself from Marvel. I think the current bunch of folks over at Warner Brothers are really interested in building out a world and creating something that's unique to the filmmakers. Gunn told The Times, "We're in a strange time, so anything can happen." So this is very interesting. And I've explained to you before, I'm going to put this down for a minute, there's a bit more to go, but I'm going to explain to you how it's going to work after Flashpoint. Now, pre-Flashpoint, we've got the Suicide Squad, we've got the Batman, we've got Black Adam, which we spoke about earlier, and we've got Aquaman, right? So that's pre-Flashpoint. These will just mainly be individual movies with a little bit of connectivity to the outer DCEU. Now in January we have Peacemaker. This is a prequel. I'm predicting this is going to be set between MOS and BVS because there's a sci-fi threat. So I'm interested to see how this involves Peacemaker. That's my prediction anyway. And I think he will be on the outside of that battle, being involved in kind of collateral damage and maybe losing his father or his parents. We'll see what happens there. But that's how I see that. Now, so individual standalone movies with a little bit of interconnectivity with post-credit scenes a lot. Now after Flashpoint, everything becomes canon. The whole of the multiverse becomes canon. Post-credit scenes, Easter eggs, cameos, the lot. This is how they'll do it. They'll let you make your own movie and tell your own story, like James was able to do with Guardians Volume 1 and 2, but you still have to put something from the actual universe inside, but it won't interfere with what you're doing, mainly via post-credit scenes, so it doesn't interfere with your actual movie. And this is what they're going with. So, as James says, they'll be able to connect the universe, but still let directors do what they want. Gunn continued, "I do find because of the ability to do different stuff in the DC multiverse, it's fun. They are they're starting to really resemble their comic books. Very interesting, because James knows DC. The Marvel Universe has always been a little more cohesive, and DC has always had more great single runs. They had The Dark Knight Returns, they had Watchmen, they had The Killing Joke, they had Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. The fact that they did Joker, which is a totally different type of movie, that to me is cool. I'm very excited about Matt's movie, The Batman from Matt Reeves. They're getting some really good filmmakers involved. Yes, they are. They're always going to be hit or miss. I just want them to, listen, I just don't want them to get boring. Very interesting from James Gunn, and I think that's it. So let's unpackage this. It's pretty obvious that James Gunn, once he was fired from Disney, felt like a knife went deeply into his back. Whatever his comments, whatever you and I say on social media, right, unless we're threatening, we're threatening to end somebody's life, shouldn't mean you lose your job. It was a betrayal. He'd done 2 great movies for them, brought them a lot of money, yet he got carried away with himself. He'd never been this popular before. It went to his head. He's admitted that. But they should have spoken to him. That's it. Once they sacked him, and then there was a big campaign like Release the Snyder Cut to get him back. That campaign won. But just because he agreed to come back, because he had them between the balls, they couldn't use his script because they didn't have it yet completely. They couldn't use a lot of his stuff because it was his stuff, even though Disney owned the Marvel IP. It's very complicated. This is why Zack Snyder's going to be on it, pretty much going to have the executive producer credit on every future DC movie. It looks like. We'll see what happens there. So he doesn't like Disney anymore. He loves Feige. He's called him his friend, and that's fair enough. But he's done with them. He is done with them, and he's really full on in now with DC. And I said this from the moment he took the job. They gave him an opportunity when no one would fucking touch him with a barge pole. How would you feel towards Walter Hamada and Toby Emmerich if they did that for you? They didn't have to take him on. They said, listen, you are a talented filmmaker. We don't give a shit what you said on Twitter, and neither did I. I must admit, when he was first fired, because he did come across arrogant in those days, I'm guilty of this. I did have kind of a bit of glee about it, but now looking back, I can admit I was wrong about that, and actually James Gunn's a good guy and a very talented filmmaker, so I apologise to him for that. But listen, his future is with DC. That's exciting, because this guy is exactly what we need in DC live action. I'm going to drink some water, then we're really going to close this off and talk about this fully. That's better. What James Gunn said about creative freedom of Warner Brothers and being able to tell individual stories and giving these talented filmmakers coming through to the DCEU, especially from New Line Cinema, their own movies and being able to do what they want, like Matt Reeves on the Batman, is a big deal. The multiverse is a big deal. You can literally have Matt Reeves carving out an Earth 2 and doing whatever he wants within his own structure of Gotham PD and the Batman franchise in movie theatres. This is huge. Some films can be interconnected, some films may have just a little bit of interconnectivity, but every film will be that filmmaker's vision. Now, Andy Muschietti is able to cast who he wanted. You know, Sasha Calle wasn't the studio's decision, that was Andy's decision, because he's a Latino. I think he's Argentinian. I'm not sure if Sasha Calle is actually Argentinian, but she's a Latino actress, right? So he wanted to represent some of his people, and let's be honest, Latino representation and inclusion isn't exactly that big in Hollywood. So he's had a lot of freedom. But this is part of Warner Brothers' big plan, so they had a lot more involvement in this film than they have with James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. James is an auteur. He's going to come in and do whatever he wants, or he's not going to do it. But he's admitted he's had more freedom with Warner Brothers in The Suicide Squad than he has over at the MCU. Now, he spoke about Kevin Feige being really involved because it's his franchise. He's the boss. He's the showrunner. Basically, if he takes a step back, it's not going to be what we see it as, and a lot of people like it. Who knows what they're going to do without Kevin Feige? They'll be absolutely screwed, because there's only one Kevin Feige. People keep on talking about WB and the DCEU needing a Kevin Feige. Well, unless you nab Kevin Feige, by the way, I can see WB being able to do that in the next few years. We will see. Some people would hate that and be very angry and toxic about that. So yeah, James Gunn talking about the great freedom he had at WB with the Suicide Squad is going to trigger a portion, not all, of the Snyderverse fandom, because they're constantly putting out this fake propaganda, how their man was treated, how they're a horrible company, and trashing every film that Warner Brothers have ever made in the past 100 years. Now, somebody actually echoed what I was saying about this and has actually muted Restore the Snyderverse, release the air cut. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but now we talk about this Release the Air Cut campaign event on August the 5th. Surprise, surprise, the same date as the release of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Let me tell you how I feel about this. Because you have scheduled it for that date, I'm not going to support your event. I want the air cut released, I want the Snyderverse restored, but I also want to see these great movies that WB are producing. 5 movies, a multitude of HBO Max shows. I want them to do well. But it's pretty clear to me that the Snyderverse fandom now has disintegrated into different portions, and a lot of these people want to destroy Warner Brothers, want to destroy their DC plan, and all they think is Snyder or nothing. Well, I'm not Snyder or nothing. I've said from the very beginning, from the green lighting of the Snyder Cut, that we can have it all, and maybe we still can. I don't know that, but what I'm telling you is the way you are going at it, some of you in the Snyderverse community, you are driving people away from your movement. Now, I'm sure you'll get good numbers on August the 5th, but your real plan, let's be honest, how many of you were fighting for Release the Air Cut when the Snyder Cut was green-lit? Hardly none. How many of you decided that Zack's movie should be released first before David's movie, which was a despicable opinion to have, seeing that David's movie was going to originally be released before Zack's movie? So that's the movie, in terms of the story, that had to be released first. But we didn't fight for that. We didn't care, did we? Oh, David's movie. At first I was fine for it, by the way. I was saying it needs to come first. Then you had Grace Randolph, because we know who she supports, saying that David's movie might be crap and it might hurt the Snyder Cut. Bullshit. Now, who told her to say that? There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes you don't know about. And I've told you before, there will be Warner Brothers executives and DC executives coming out to give their side of the Snyder story. There has always been two sides to this story, and Snyder isn't the innocent victim that you will think he is. Yes, he had a vision, but he wants 100% vision. And as I've said before, nobody gets that in this industry unless you're working for a streaming service, because they really don't want to get involved with the nuts and bolts and day-to-day working of things. Now, when you come to a DC IP, the people who own the IP, the people who are paying the bill, have every right to make final decisions on what you're doing. It's as simple as that. James Gunn spoke about Kevin Feige doing this very thing. Kevin Feige does not give most of his directors, a freedom. But he was very clever with James Gunn. He was so desperate to get Gunn to do Guardians that he was happy to bring this auteur in and say, do you know what? I think you're capable of doing something special for us here. We do need some Easter eggs in this, but do your thing. And it's because he did his thing and Feige just gave him a helping nudge and a helping hand. That's why it worked. Now, in terms of Snyder, Warner Brothers never brought him in. Warner brought Nolan in, Nolan brought in Snyder. Warner Brothers never wanted Snyder at this party. Nolan insisted, they trusted Nolan, then Nolan walked away from the project and did exactly what Warner didn't want him to do, is pretty much leave Snyder to his own devices. This is why Man of Steel turned out a more cohesive cinematic movie for the broader audience, even though BVS made more money, understandably, because Batman and Superman were both going to be in this movie. So, Warner Brothers have always been, for probably the past 100 years in their history, or however long they've been going, and I don't have that information right here, a great place for artists to be free to create the art they want to create, with very little kind of interruption and messing around from them. But of course there's always going to be that. Now, that all kind of changed from the public kind of mentality when all the information about Snyder came out. But it's interesting, Warner Brothers never came out with their side of the story. And that's what I'm saying. They have a side. You've got to be able to work with your director. You've got to be able to go in there and say, do you know what? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Patty Jenkins is another difficult customer. She wants everything her own way, and you just can't do that. But she pretty much did get everything her own way with Wonder Woman 84. The studio wanted the Themyscira sequence out and the horrible mouse sequence out. She got to keep it. They didn't force her to get rid of them, although they were right. She should have got rid of the mouse scene, but not the Themyscira scene. She was right to keep that. The best, probably one of the best moments of the film, by the way. Thanks to Lily Aspel, mostly, and Hans Zimmer's great music. So, she was complaining about the first Wonder Woman film. She toxically hated that film. She moved so away from it. It's the better film. It made more money. Well, we don't actually know how much money Wonder Woman 84 made, but definitely considerably less than the first Wonder Woman. So these people complaining about their bro and cis directors not getting creative freedom and getting interfered with, there's always a good reason for that. And sooner rather than later, when we get closer and closer to the release of the Flash movie, Warner Brothers are going to talk. And some of you are not going to like it. But I'm fed up of this propaganda, because it's bullshit. Warner Brothers have their side of the story to tell, and they're going to tell it. And when they do tell it, you're not going to like the truths that are going to happen. So you've scheduled a Release the Air Cut event for August the 5th. For me, that is so toxic that I will not support it. I never will support that. I'm here to support everything, but I am not going to take the trend away from James Gunn's The Suicide Squad just so you can boast that that trend has taken away from James' movie. You may be able to do that. I hope you don't succeed. I hope you succeed in releasing the Air Cut, because I really want to see that movie, and I hope that we succeed in restoring the Snyderverse. But at the end of the day, what you're doing with that date is utterly toxic, and I will have nothing to do with it. I'm here to support the next DC movie, which is James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And because you're not willing to do that, and because you're scheduling this event on the 5th, you are now part of the problem. Who was it yesterday who started attacking certain Snyder DC fans, saying we're all, what was it called? We're all James Gunn, I forgot what he called, lovers. It was another word for James Gunn lovers. And he attacked us. He says, keep on unfollowing me, James Gunn, shields or lovers, or whatever he called us. And I'm thinking, you're attacking people and you wonder why they're unfollowing you. This is the toxic behaviour. He actually believes you've either got to support Snyder or Gunn. They're angry with Gunn for coming in and replacing Air. Well, someone was going to do it. It's a career. It's a great move for the man. Why wouldn't he want to do it? Why would he stay unemployed for Zack Snyder? Jesus Christ, you think Snyder's Jesus Christ and we should all sacrifice ourselves for him? No. DC live action must continue. Warner Brothers and all these wonderful creatives have got a great plan for the future. And I'm backing it, and I'm backing them. Comment down below, like, share and subscribe. And by the way, before I go, let's talk about Justice League. I wrote something on Twitter. The cast and the crew treated Joss Whedon as badly on Justice League as he treated the cast and crew. He didn't want to deal with them because they weren't his cast and crew, and they didn't want to deal with him because he wasn't their director, the director who employed them. And this was the problem. Everyone on that fucking set was majorly unprofessional. You're not happy the way Zack was treated? It was unfair? Yes, it was. Welcome to the real fucking world. And if your director, who I love his DC movies, but if your director had been more willing to give 50-50 and talk to the studio and understand what was going on, then maybe we wouldn't have been there. But everyone on that Justice League reshoot set was unprofessional. Whedon, cast and crew. They've all got themselves to blame why that film failed. They could have made a great movie, but the biggest people at fault was the leadership of the studio back then. Because they should have just said, listen, we have had creative differences with Zack Snyder. We are going to go our own direction, and Joss Whedon is going to help us get there. He's going to start again, do his own thing with the DCEU. He's going to run the DCEU, Joss Whedon's DCEU. He's going to work alongside Jeff Johns. And I think if Joss and Jeff will work together to construct a brand new DCEU, it would have been awesome. You may not like me for saying that. I know. Joss Whedon isn't on the side of the angels. Nobody you fucking stand, including Zack Snyder, is on the side of the fucking angels. You can look up to your heroes, but don't expect them to be perfect. Because you're not perfect, why should you be? So at the end of the day, that's what should have happened. Instead, so they could all get their bonuses, they rushed out a load of shit about somebody else's film, and it ended in tears. Now, the new leadership, Walter Hamada and Ann Sarnoff, are working together with people like Jim Lee, who understand DC, totally understand it, to reframe the universe, to create this multiverse strategy. It's not their fault. Now, I know you hate Ann Sarnoff and Walter Hamada. Ann Sarnoff did a very big interview, a hit piece as we've been calling it. But it's her responsibility to make DC and everything at Warner Brothers, all the IPs, as successful as possible for the broader audience. It is not her responsibility to be loyal to one director who she didn't bring into the company to begin with. Now, just before I go again, I keep on remembering things. Everyone's jumping on Space Jam because it shows off a lot of Warner Brothers' other IPs. I think that's a fun element of the movie. I don't have an issue. Yes, this film was never going to make a lot of money, and you, propaganda agenda artists, are going to go at this film, aren't you? So it's a flop, another flop by WB, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Couldn't give a shit what you've got to say, because at the end of the day, Warner Brothers is a great studio with a great history. In the next couple of years, HBO Max is really going to get off the ground, and it's going to be one of the top streamers. And WB will be one of the top, if not the top, studios again. And I'm standing with them, and I'm backing them. And if that makes me a WB shill, sue me, baby. Comment down below. like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget to come over for a chat on Twitter @MoviesTVMad. Until then, goodbye.